So how many of you are thankful for your scars? Right? The reality is every single human being that walks the earth has scars in one way or another. They may be actual scars, ask my wife, right? But they may be just emotional scars. And the reality of that situation is we can either be thankful for them or resentful of them. But it doesn't change the scars, right? And so it's so important that we remember that every step of the way. We all have those things in our lives that are painful, that may still hurt today, but yet without them, we wouldn't be able to recognize the truth of who God is. And I know that sometimes when you're in the midst of the pain, that doesn't feel real, but I know it is. I've experienced it, and I want you all to experience it as well. I want more of it myself, because I don't experience it enough, right? And the one thing I tell you guys, and I want you to remember, is I'm just as broken as y'all, right? And I am growing, and I'm just asking you to grow with me, right? I have not arrived. I will get things wrong. I will hurt you. That's a promise. And not that I want to, it's just, I know it's true. And I also know that each and every one of you at some point will probably hurt me. Not that you want to, but because we're broken people, right? And we continue to grow together. And so I ask you to grow with me as we go through this process of recovery, sanctification. So I can't decide on the name, the title for today's sermon. I wrote something down when I started the thing for the Facebook Live. I don't even remember what I put down. On my sheet here I have another title. I don't like any of them, I don't think, but they're all appropriate. And it has to do, today's message has to do with what do we do after we've been rescued. If you were here last week, some of what I preached today will just kind of be a continuation of last week's
How about working
story.
on the steps?
Well, we need to definitely be working the steps every single day. That's an absolute. But what do we do? What does it look like after we've been rescued, right? And so I thought it was a good idea to take a look in a more storied way, a parable type way, what it might look like. Like I said, kind of a continuation from last week. God might be working something out in me in this story, I don't know. But let's start with Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." It's a familiar piece of scripture, isn't it? We've heard it so many times before, and yet sometimes we can get hung up with what it might mean. I apparently rode into some heavy dust on the way here, and it is hanging in my nose and got my sinuses drained, so I apologize for the coffee. Last week, if you were here, we talked about what real freedom was, right? And I gave you a parable of being rescued from a prison and having and again, these are my parables, not Bible parables. Gotta make that clear. But I gave you a parable of living a life where you end up being arrested, and all your people that you've trusted all your life are the reason that you're there. And you're being interrogated daily and treated poorly, and you're in prison and in chains, and it's horrible. And I told you what it was like and what your choices would be if you were rescued. Talked about the rescue happening in two ways. One, there was a distraction because this ruler of this other country shows up, right? And while he's there keeping them distracted, a commando team comes in to rescue you. And I'm going to paraphrase the whole thing really quickly. All right, commando team comes in, they bust open your cell, and you've got just a few choices. First thing is you can just cower in your corner and say, no, I'm not going with you, because you don't know who these people are or what country they're from. That's first choice. Next choice, you get excited because your door's been busted in, you're being rescued, and as you step out the door, you see all the danger of all the prison guards and everybody coming to get you. And you run back into your cell and you cower in the corner again. Third choice, you could get in with the commandos. They get you out the doors and out the prison walls, and they're taking you to the helicopter, and you notice that your town is just outside of those prison walls. And you say, thanks guys, and you head off to your own town to hang out, and you do what you always do. Figure I'll never get arrested again, I can hide well, and I can keep myself in a good check. Thanks for rescuing me, I'm good to go, but I'm going to stay here. And the last choice that I brought up is the actual choice of freedom. You recognize that that helicopter right there is going to take you to a safe place. And so you get on the helicopter and they fly you away and you land in this new country. And when you get there, you find out that the ruler of that country was the distraction needed for the commando team to come in. He was there at the prison as a dignitary to create the distraction enough that the commandos were able to do what they had to do. And you find out that not only did he create the distraction, but because of the escape, they take him captive and execute him. So you can have your freedom. And he knew it was going to happen beforehand. We talked about what real freedom is. It's not the ability to do the things we want without restriction. It's to choose life inside of an environment that, even though it has limitations, we willingly want to live within those limitations. In the Christian life, it means living in a manner that would please God. But we're doing it not because of an obligation or to earn something, but out of gratitude for the grace and mercy God has already shown us. The difference between living as a captive, always hoping for rescue, or maybe even getting to the point where you've been a captive so long that you've given up on rescue and you're just resigned to live in captivity. The difference between that and freedom is being willing to live as a servant, because you recognize that the service part of your life is less of a burden than it is to just survive. Last week I described that prison break, and I told you about your choices once those commandos arrived. But what I didn't talk about was the new country and what it would look like for you. You see, once we're rescued and we're accepted, and you accept your new country, you become a citizen of heaven. You now have a choice to live in that kingdom or to live outside of it. You get to the gate and you're told that to enter you must become a slave of the king and serve, doing whatever menial tasks need to be done. You look around and you see people coming and going from the gate that don't look like they're ditch diggers. They don't even look like they've ever hauled a thing of trash in their lives. They look like royalty. And so you start thinking, and you ask yourself, what's going on here? You're standing there at the gate and you ask the gatekeeper, can I keep my citizenship to heaven and live just outside the walls? I mean, it's nice here. I can see inside the city. I can hear everything that's going on. I can smell the beauty of this place. Look, I can even interact with all of the royalty of that kingdom. They come and go through that gate constantly. They're free to interact with all of us. And the guard looks you square in the eyes and says, yeah, you can. In that moment, your ears stop listening because you don't ever want to be a slave again. Unfortunately for you, the guard says, yes, you can. But if you come in, you'll just be just like every one of these you see. So many of us only hear, yes, you can. You can have your citizenship and live just outside the gate. Now, if we go back a little bit into our lives, we all know what it looks like to live outside of the kingdom. Before we were placed in that prison of slavery and bondage, we lived outside the kingdom. Some of us lived in wastelands way outside of the kingdom, where we never even heard of that kingdom before. We definitely never met anybody from it. Some of us lived so close that we heard and smelled all the wonders of that place. But the reality is, none of us had the ability to live inside the kingdom. We could watch the gate, but we couldn't get past that checkpoint. Because no matter how much we tried to clean ourselves up, dress exactly the way the people did that were coming through that gateway and coming out to interact with us, act exactly like they acted, talk just like they talked. No matter what we did, no matter how clean we got ourselves, seemed like we'd get to that gate, but we couldn't pass. Those people coming and going, they always looked like they never had any problems in their lives. We could interact with them. It was interesting, though, every time we watched, they would come through and out, and they would interact with the world around them. All of the world outside the gate. And then when they would walk back up to that gate, they'd walk up, and the guard would look at them and say, "How are you?" And they'd respond, "It's a beautiful day." Or some other great platitude, and they'd just walk in. They were greeted every time pleasantly and gratefully. But no matter how you dressed, what you did, no matter how well you bathed, it didn't matter. You would walk up, and the guard wouldn't say, "How are you today?" He would say, "Can I see the proof of your citizenship?" We look around and we see how amazing it is inside that gate. We want to go in. We never have the right answer. We see how incredible it is. Those people seem so happy. They're so willing to help others around them. We want that freedom. Now go back to your rescue. You've decided to get on the helicopter. You go to the new city, and you recognize what it cost for your freedom. They offer you citizenship, and you gladly accept it. You've never been treated this way ever in your life. You're in rags. You look miserable. You're skin and bones because of the prison that you lived in. Can't hardly do anything. Your health is deteriorating. And you walk up to the gate and you're greeted. How are you today? Just like every other citizen is greeted. The guard says, because you didn't know how to respond, this must be your first time entering as a citizen. Welcome. But I need to tell you something. To live inside of these city walls, inside this kingdom, there's one thing that's absolutely true. To live here, you must be a slave of the king. It's so difficult to hear because we don't want to think about the fact that we would ever have to be a slave ever again. Many of us, when we get to that point, think we're never going to have to work hard again at anything. And yet we get to the gate, we can walk through if we want, but we're told we're going to be required to be a slave when we go inside. Many of us would probably start thinking, this is unacceptable. We'd start wondering if there's a class system within the structure of heaven, the kingdom. I mean, those people didn't look like they'd been slaves. They definitely weren't restricted in how they came and went. Start to wonder, is it a trick to keep the upper class in their positions while the slaves do all the dirty work? We all want the promise of citizenship, but we really struggle with the possibility and the acceptance of being a slave to live there. Live the kingdom life right now. Eternity as a slave in that place, well, that might be a different story because that's way better than burning in hell forever. But right now, I don't think so. I'm just going to stay really close because it's really safe here. I can still interact with all these people. I can hear everything that's going on. I can smell. I mean, they're still bringing stuff out and sharing it with us. But the reality is God wants us to have a kingdom life right now. Unfortunately, most of the world is unwilling to do what it takes in the moment to be royalty. Every one of these people we saw coming out of the city and going back in, they're just like us. The only difference is they're willing to do whatever is needed to be done. And if you would have had an opportunity to talk to them or listen to them, they would have told you that in every task, the king would be right there with you doing the work. Digging a ditch, taking out the garbage, slopping the hogs, no matter what it is, the king is right there with you. They would also tell you that their royalty is not because they were born into it, but because God gave them that position. Romans chapter 8, verse 14 through 17. For those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs. Heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his suffering, in order that we may also share in his glory. In the Old Testament, the Israelites knew what it was like to be slaves. They were in slavery in Egypt for 300 years or more. But they got to the land that God promised them. And then they struggled with the idea that they would have to serve a new master, Yahweh, God. The psalmist wrote this in Psalms 105, which describes that journey and what it looked like. At the end of it, in Psalm 105, verse 42 through 45, it says this: For he remembered his holy promise given to his servant Abraham. He brought out his people with rejoicing, his chosen ones with shouts of joy. He gave them the land of the nations, and they fell heir to what others had toiled for, that they might keep his precepts and observe his laws. Praise Yahweh. Adam Clarke wrote in his commentary about these verses, saying this, that they might be properly instructed and properly disciplined, to this end, purposed by divine revelation. Men are to be made wise unto salvation, and then to be brought under the yoke of obedience. He who is not conformed to God's word shall not enter into Christ's kingdom. We started today with the verses from Jesus saying, take my yoke and put it on and work doing whatever I say. Let me read you those verses in context for you. Matthew 11, 25 through 30. At that time Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this is what you were pleased to do. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. The idea that rest comes from putting a yoke on seems strange. A yoke is one of those things that we put on beasts of burden and hook them up to a device that needs to be pulled. All the heavy work gets done when you have that yoke on you. Sometimes it's a singular yoke where you bear all the weight. Other times it puts multiple animals together. Putting a yoke on and thinking that we're going to get rest just seems contradictory. But if we recognize that this yoke is built for two people, not just you alone, Jesus, the King, will be tied to you, tied to your side. Not only will he be sharing the burden, but because of his great knowledge, he's going to show us at every step what to do. And the reality is, the work in that situation will never feel overwhelming. And I'll say this. If you're feeling overwhelmed in a moment, you're not living as a servant, bound and tied with a yoke to Jesus Christ. Multiple things might be going on. We may be citizens of the kingdom, but we've chosen to live outside of the kingdom. We may have made the decision to be servants, but when we go in, we see that yoke and we look at it and it looks so heavy. And the work that it's tied to looks so hard. And I'll be honest, I've actually done this occasion or two where I look at what God wants me to do and the work that has to be done. And I think, or I say, can't I just sweep the floor? Just so I don't have to carry that burden? I don't have to put on that yoke? I can tell you this. Pushing that broom is so hard. But if I allow myself to be tied to the Spirit of God, yoked to Jesus, plowing a 50-acre field is far easier than pushing a broom 50 feet. When Solomon evaluated the meaning of life in Ecclesiastes, he concluded with this thought. Ecclesiastes 12:13 and 14. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God, keep His commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. To be free, we must be willing to do whatever it takes, no matter how hard it seems. We must be willing to endure, no matter how long it might take. And if we're willing to do that, not because it's an obligation, not because we're commanded to, but if we're willing to do that because of our gratitude of the rescue that Jesus orchestrated on your behalf, on my behalf, if we're willing to put that yoke on, it's then that we will find that there is never going to be a task that will ever leave us carrying the burden alone. But if you're not willing to start, you're going to find yourself trying to do things on your own, always unsatisfied, always left, always weary, always alone. The reality of our lives comes down to the decisions we make. We can allow ourselves to be rescued. We can get on the helicopter and go to the new land. We can accept our citizenship. But you notice that's not the end of the story. The citizenship is amazing, and it gives you an absolute promise. Eternity in the kingdom. But that wasn't all that was offered you with that citizenship. You're offered the kingdom life right now. It was never promised to you that the kingdom life would be work-free, that it would be paradise right here, right now, and that there would be no struggles. Matter of fact, when you got to the gate, you had to make another decision. And every one of you including myself, has to make that decision every single day. We make the decision on whether we're willing to be slaves in the kingdom. We're told that we're going to be slaves, but slavery in the kingdom means that the Spirit of God, tied to you, takes you through the process, one step at a time, teaching you what to do next and helping you carry that load. Most people don't think about it, but a yoke does several things. First, it multiplies the effort by putting two same type of animals together. 2 cows, 2 horses, whatever. They're similar in size. The next thing it does is you often tie a very experienced animal with a very inexperienced animal. And by doing that, the inexperienced learns what to do next, what's expected of them, and how to do it. Often, as you see those animals working together and doing the same tasks over and over again, they get to the point where they don't even need the yoke anymore. They're that close, that bonded, that they can just do the work without being tied at the shoulders. They can just wear a harness and do the same work because they've learned to work so well together. That's what it looks like to walk in the Spirit. And that's what it looks like to live out the 12th step. We don't get there at the beginning, but we get to live there. Some of us, we're still working out the ideas of there just being a God. Some have recognized, yes, there is a God. Some of us have gotten to the point where we've got to make a decision. Okay, I know there's a God. I realize that He can help me. And now I believe, don't want to anymore. I believe that not only can He, but He wants to help me. And I think I'll let Him. You got your citizenship now, guys, if you've gotten to that point. Now it's time to walk up to the gate. It's time to be willing to do what it takes in the moment, no matter what, no matter how long, and trust Jesus when He says, take my yoke. Take my yoke. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. You will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So my question today, for you to answer between you and God, as I play this last song, maybe you want to come to the altar, that's fine. Maybe you want to come to me and have a conversation, that's fine. But my question for you is, are you willing to do whatever it takes? So many times in your life you've been asked that question and you say yes, but you know it's not true. Today, are you willing to do whatever it takes? Maybe you haven't even just gotten to step 3 yet, but you're ready to do that today. It's a perfect time to do that. Accept your citizenship into the kingdom of heaven. Because now you know what it's going to look like later on. The king has paid the penalty. The commandos have rescued you. What are you going to do with that? Let's take a minute. Let's ask ourselves those questions. And let's move forward from here today.